Hey, Scott, welcome to Mass Construction Show.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me on.
Yes, excellent. So I think you've got the prime audience here, Scott, which is code people. We've got tech folks, and we have people in government. So I think everybody that would be interested in kind of your story and Garrett's story will be listeners. So I'm excited where most people may not have an audience for building code and fire code, but this is the one. So this will be great. I'm looking forward to it a lot. We ended up coming across this as, we do a weekly live. We were talking about the ProCodes Act. Garrett was watching and he was like, hey, that's us, So thanks to Garrett for reaching out and making this happen. But why don't you tell people, what did you and Garrett start out to do with Upcodes?
Yeah, sure thing. And you're right. It is a small world, and that overlap of codes and architects and building officials and fire marshals, it's a small world and very few places of overlap. But that's been our kind of fascination and commitment for the last 10 years, coming up to 10 years, I should say. Wow. So going back, almost a decade now, my background was in architecture. So I worked abroad. I worked in Hong Kong for a couple of years, primarily just dealing with codes and regulation and in the projects we were working on abroad there, but transferred to the New York City office, started working on domestic projects, and really thought the regulation and the code side would be a little bit more simple than it had been previously in my career. But lo and behold, the US is much more, I'd say, sophisticated in terms of its codes and regulations, much like safer buildings. I would say like really extensive codes for a very good purpose, obviously, like making safe and resilient communities. But the process of understanding those regulations was really, really difficult. We had a physical library of code books. We were trying to staple in and insert updates into those code books or tracking, right? Yeah, case,
Whole stack behind me. Yeah.
And just cobbling together these resources to understand what are the applicable codes in to these projects in these different jurisdictions. And the sad reality was we were making mistakes left and right. We had code consultants on the project. We had bringing all these different experts, but it's just a hard thing to get the code right. And unfortunately, a lot of these kind of avoidable mistakes would originate upstream in the process of the project, and then if we didn't catch them, go all the way through to plan review. Ideally, it's caught there. But if it has been, then it can get into pre-construction. Ideally caught there, but if not, it could get into construction and caught by the inspectors. So you see these kind of friction points through the whole life cycle of a project. So
yeah, I've seen all of them, and even worse at certificate of occupancy when they're doing final inspections, which is even more terrifying.
Oh, it's horrifying. Yeah, if you have to demo something on the project site because you got the code wrong, and we hear that, it's like, okay, maybe the toilet was X amount of inches away from the wall in this accessible bathroom, didn't take into account the grouting or the tile or the finishing, and all of a sudden it's like a quarter inch, half inch off, and it's just not code compliant. But that's a very human, very understandable mistake when it's such a difficult and dense kind of area of our profession.
And you guys were seeking to try and simplify that?
Yeah, exactly. So I invited Garrett over. He was working at PlanGrid, so on the software side in construction, and I was thinking, can we apply software to this? What can we do to bring modern tools to make this process a little bit easier? Can we avoid these mistakes? And that's what started Upcodes. And the original idea was bringing together all of these codes, all these regulations into one place, make them searchable. Make it easy to read, to print, to go through, to exchange, and it really grew from there. Now the product's evolved substantially since nearly 10 years ago now, but that was kind of the genesis. That's where we started out.
It's funny, I think you kindly used the word that the codes were sophisticated. You could also say complex, right, or confusing.
For sure. Yeah, I think so. I think almost always there's very good intent behind it. And we could get into some edge cases there, but I think it always has good intent. but the code always gets more complex. Like it's a very additive process. Like it just grows and grows. If you look at the size of a code book from the 60s or 70s compared to today, like very, very different. And quite heavy. We often think about in software engineering a term called refactoring. And it's basically going back into code you've already written and then seeing how can we get the same output, but make it more simple in terms of like the software code. So can we basically rewrite this thing and reduce the amount of code by like 50% or 30%, just make it more simple. And that process just doesn't happen to any great extent in the code writing process. Like, can we get the same building, the same safety standards, but make the codes and the regulations behind it a little bit more easy? It just rationalize it a little bit more now that we've had time to digest and see what it's like.
Yeah, because unlike software code where people will go back and clean it up to streamline it, that doesn't happen in government code, right? Building code, zoning code. It only ever grows and becomes more complex with each add.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and not to jump ahead, but
No, go for it.
With the current kind of politics out there, like there is a push to deregulation, to simplifying this. And I know like the current administration made a statement when it came to like building data centers. How do we increase permitting time? And how do we standardize and simplify regulations? And in an interesting way, it's like, what is this pushback going to look like? Is it going to be a little bit like an overcorrection? Is it going to be too blunt of an object just to go in and tear things up? Like it is a fine balance. So it's really tricky. I just wish we were just conscious of that the whole time instead of not really thinking about that for 20, 30 years and all of a sudden coming in with like a pretty crude
blunt instrument. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, because it's what has happened. It's hit critical mass now, and when you're talking about the politics, like you see certain jurisdictions talking about putting a hold, so no new building code adoption until 2030. They're like, let's just hit the brakes.
Right.
And it's warranted because, and I think there's some psychology there, right? Because I've sat in on some of the code development meetings, and no one wants to be the person to take something out, especially if it's considered life safety. Because everyone says, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And I had a guest on who is a fire marshal and a building commissioner, and he said it's important to realize that, the code is to provide reasonable measures of health and safety. We kind of lose that, and no one wants to take a step back, but at some point you do, because what you end up with, and forgive me for taking over here a bit, but I'm kind of passionate about it, is you end up with over-regulation, and then you end up with non-compliance because people throw up their hands. It becomes too confusing, and they either say, I'm not going to get a permit, or the building official says, I don't know what this is. Yeah, however you did it is fine. Right. And then we end up being less safe because we've over-regulated.
Right.
Backwards.
And I think that could be a pretty uncomfortable topic to bring up and talk about. But the NAHB does a pretty good job representing the side of, making sure our homes, they need to be safe, but they also need to be affordable. So they did a study, I think this is a few years ago, but they determined that regulations added $93,000 to the cost of a new home. So just a staggering amount of money to a new home, and that it's all the way from permitting, to the building, to the fire codes and all those codes in there. But yeah, it's that tension, right? It's that balance. Like we want safety, but we have to be conscious of cost and making sure everyone can afford their home.
Yeah, it's with every single thing in life, or 99% of things of life, you need balance in there. And the same argument is had with affordable housing, which is, okay, we're going to require 20% affordable units. Well, if that makes the project not viable, you're going to have 20% of zero, or you could have 5% of 5,000. What would you like? Right. So yeah, I think but that point gets missed. I think everyone thinks, well, more rules will make things safe, and more requirements will make more affordable housing, or whatever the desired result is. But when it goes too far, I think you end up having the opposite effect. And I think that's where we ended up in the code world, if I'm being frank. We all set out to make things safer and more accessible, and we might be going the other way now.
Right. And to your point, like, do people just throw up their hands? And yeah, we are seeing that. Like, people are, stopping the production line. They're saying no more code adoptions. We're not updating our code. We need to get this, into in their perspective into better shape. But I think that's the results. It's like there's only so much you could push it, and then people just kind of give up. But I just hope in the future there could be a little bit more of a balance between the two incentives.
Yeah. And not to be giving you guys a direct plug here, but that's kind of where that's one of the problems Upcode is solving, which is there's this complexity, and you say, okay, there's the base code, then there's the local amendments, and then there's the stretch code, and then there's the state laws or the local ordinances. And it's so complex and confusing that you guys just smashed it all into one place and says, no, if you want to find out about this subject, look here, and we will tell you the local amendments, the base code, and all that kind of stuff. Correct?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's the objective is just transparency. How do we get both sides of the table, whether you're, say, a designer or a plan reviewer or a builder and an inspector, or maybe a developer owner and an insurance company? How do you get everyone on the same page so we're just operating on the same information, so they know what code is applicable at that time for that project in that jurisdiction? And that sounds simple, but it ends up being very hard for the reasons you said. It's like you have your adopted code, you have the amendments, maybe at the state level, then you have federal level agencies, then you have local towns. Yep. And for the listeners here and for the two of us, like, we're so used to that environment. But when we explain this to outside folks, or like maybe people join the company that don't come from construction, like a software engineer, we explain that, and they're just it's totally mind-boggling for them. They're like, they just can't wrap their heads around it. They're like, you have like 3 or 4 different agencies, and you don't know which code is more stringent, so you have to look at them all. But then maybe it got amended here or updated afterwards, but it was permitted in this year. It's like, it's like we've just been trained and worked in that environment. But you're right, this is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and your head spins. And at least with the code and the amendments, you could explain that to somebody. But when you have the one-off ordinances, or but when you're working in this town, you need to do this, and you say, well, how are you supposed to know that? Or where does it say that? And nowhere. You just have to know that.
Right.
Or there's a state law that overrides what the code and the amendment say, and you just have to know that. And I don't think you guys have been able to solve all of that yet. You've kind of taken the 90%, right, and got it. But there's still edge cases that don't get incorporated.
Exactly. Yeah. So if it's very local, let's say like a county and maybe a local ordinance, we don't cover that yet. So we do as much as we can. But you're right in that we don't cover everything there. Yeah.
Okay. So Upcodes is housed as much as possible in one place, and you go in and you say, I'm in Massachusetts. I want to look at Massachusetts. I want to know, travel distance or whatever. I type it in, and it'll send me to that section of the code.
Right. And that's certainly where we started. I'd say in the last 2 years, we're incorporating more and more AI into it. And part of our problem was, as we grew, the amount of regulation code they were hosting was growing exponentially. Today, we have over 6 million sections of code. 12,000 of those sections get updated every month on average. So it's just a huge breadth, and it's changing over time. And the community and users were saying, okay, this is great. There's a lot of code. How do we possibly traverse the amount of data here? How do we know which code is applicable to our project? And we were trying to figure out, like, how do we cut through that and get that to the user? And fortunately, LLMs and the advent of a lot of these new AI technologies really queued up well to parse this. Now, it's always developing, but to your point, like, what does that end user experience look like? And that's, typing in or explaining. It's like, okay, I'm maybe like an R2 occupancy, and this construction type, and located here in this year. What's my travel distance, or what's my hallway width, or what are my stair requirements? And it'll start to pull from the different codes, from the fire code, from the building code, maybe from the electrical code if applicable, or accessibility code, and really stitch that together to an answer, and then start to route people into the different places of the code.
Yeah, and you still need to have um, there's like a prerequisite to some of it, right? You have to have an understanding of the codes and which book is taking preference here. If you have an answer that says the IFC says this and the IBC says that, which one am I following? So it's not magic, but it makes it a lot easier, a lot easier as someone who uses. I'm a user as well, and I'm in Upcodes the majority of the time. I have an FPA link for when I have like the edge cases and need to dig into little standards, but like I find Upcodes much easier to use it's a great Swiss Army knife from that perspective.
And just to go back to something you mentioned about some of these edge cases and like the other 10%, there's also another complication in that which codebook to use or how do you interpret it can vary. And that can change jurisdiction by jurisdiction, or the AHJ, like the building department or fire department you're working with, that can vary. So we try to add two more things into there, which is one is the educational component. So layering on diagrams, like explaining these concepts, like how could you interpret this or apply it with examples or visual diagrams. And then the second is letting firms capture some of their institutional knowledge, basically their know-how. And from their technical leaders, they can start to write comments, create projects, or create templates, or research studies, and then share that with the office. So to your point, like which codebook do you choose, or which section do you pick? Hopefully the educational content can guide some of those folks so they could level up their knowledge, or their company or department's internal knowledge, like with their comments and historical projects can add to that as well.
Yeah. Yep. Even like some of the summaries I found, very helpful and very, very useful to kind of get a code path down. Okay, here's what this says, this is what that says. It's a nice function. So, but before we dive into the kind of deeper tools of Upcodes, when you started out doing this, it's completely changing the way accessing codes was done historically. It started with a book, and then it became PDF versions, then it was online, and it's kind of processed. Like, did the code writing bodies, for lack of, I think they'll call them standard development organizations, did you receive, what was their response when you started doing this?
Well, I think our first interaction with the development organizations was basically we got sued. It was a court summons. So that was our first introduction to them. And to back up a little bit,
hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess that's how they conduct business.
Yeah.
But when we started, we looked at the case law. We looked at the landscape, and in 2002 there was a VEC case in Texas, and that was two organizations, SBCCI, I believe, and BOCA, who would combine to become ICC, or the International Code Council. But when they were the two different organizations, they brought a suit, and the court said, and went up to appeals, and said, no, you can't copyright the law. Like, these codes are adopted into law, and you can't, that enters the public domain. So we looked at that, we're like, great. Like, yeah, that's our understanding too. Like all the homeowners and developers and professionals and builders, they need access to the laws, and there should be tools built on top of that. So we started to do that and making the codes freely available, and immediately got our first lawsuit. Now we got 5 lawsuits after that for a total of 6, all within the same theme, and have kind of systematically, through coming up to almost a decade, just have been going through it, establishing the courts one by one, going through win by win by win, and seeing parallel cases by public interest groups and nonprofits do the same, racking up their own wins, one going all the way to the Supreme Court. So it has been a contentious topic historically. I think by this point, I think there's about 8 or 9 cases that all land on the same side, which says codes as adopted, enter the public domain. And the other side having very little or nothing to show.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense even to a layperson, right? You can't say this is the law, but you have to pay a fee to see the law,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And it does get into, we can, I think, dive in a little further to like what's accessible and all that kind of language that becomes part of the decisions and some proposals right now, some laws that they're trying to pass to kind of undo what you've done. But at the end of the day, you've won every decision.
Yeah, we've all the motions and different stages and points have all gone towards the way of free and open access to the law.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And you had mentioned there was some other agencies.
Yeah, so there's a lot of there's a lot of people interested in this topic, and as it turns out, like while our kind of, I don't know, world of construction and like architects and building inspectors is relatively small, there's a lot of adjacent spaces that really care about open access to information, open government, also journalists, and a lot of surprising kind of diversity of organizations have entered the conversation. So people like the Wikimedia Foundation, so they do Wikipedia, Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, Public Resource Organization, American Library Association, Association of Research Libraries, Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press. So you're getting a lot of these different voices, and basically, yeah, just public interest groups enter the conversation.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about it. Like, it's the law. If you're telling me I need to comply with something, but I can't know what it is that I have to comply with. I was reading one article where they say it's like saying, hey, you have to follow these rules, but the rules are locked in the filing cabinet, and you don't know what the rules are that you need to follow, right?
And these are significant rules. These are rules that you can, I mean, at a minimum, you would get a fine. Like you say, okay, you're offsides, your building's not compliant. Going back to your example, maybe you have to do demolition or change it. That's on the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, like nearby myself over in Oakland, there was a fire. They're charged criminally for fire codes. Like the building was not up to fire code. It unfortunately it burned and there was fatalities. They were tried criminally for these same laws that people are trying to put behind paywalls or restrict access to. So it's
copyright. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's legally binding mandates enforced by the government that people are trying to prevent citizens from accessing freely, which is just absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah, I don't like to use the term, but it's because sometimes it's hyperbolic, but it's un-American, right? It's not what we were founded on, right? You can't you as an individual or corporation can't copyright the law.
You can't have a democracy where the citizens do not know what the law is and they don't know what the rules of the road are. Like it stifles innovation. It's just freedom of speech. Like all of the liberties we enjoy comes around the ability to understand like what are the rules of our nation and what do we have to follow.
Yeah. And now, in fairness, their argument would be, well, you can access it. And it was funny. I actually pulled up. I read the Supreme Court decision as well. But the language in the new act coming out actually says the term publicly accessible online. And they're saying the code writing, the SDO, Standard Development Organizations, are saying, well, it is publicly accessible online, right? And in the definition, they say if a user is required to create an account or agree to terms of service of a website or organization in order to access the material, that requirement shall not be construed to render the material as not publicly accessible. So, yeah, you have to give us your email and you have to agree to all of our. Why do I have to agree to some company's terms to access the law?
So this
I'm a citizen, aren't I?
Right.
Can't I just see the law without giving you my email or agreeing to your terms?
And there's a really phenomenal example here. So the code of I'm gonna get the name wrong, but Hammurabi.
Yeah, Hammurabi's code. Yeah, the
Yeah,
original.
Hammurabi.
Yep.
Yeah, so like the original code. And it goes way back to ancient times. But in a similar way, like there are people had to follow that code. And I think I think in the code it's like you could be stoned to death if you don't follow the code or the building
if
falls
someone,
down.
yes. If the building you build kills somebody, the punishment is your death.
Right.
Essentially.
So right.
Yeah.
And so in these first instances of the code, and that same code they had on a tablet, and they posted it up high, and they're saying, okay, the code is free, like, okay, it's free to view in quotes. And people are saying, okay, maybe it's free to view if you, well, not that they had telescopes, but they couldn't see it, and they're just like, no, don't worry about it. Like, it's free to view. It's posted up high, but there's that obvious barrier to actually be able to see it. And it's such a good analogy for today, where they're saying, okay, we're going to make it freely available, but it's completely hamstrung. You have to sign up. You're signing their terms. You can't print. You can't copy. You can't paste, and you can't actually work with the code. So it's this very hamstrung experience in which they're very, very incentivized to make it as bad as possible, so that you go pay the money and you get a subscription to the unfettered version of that code. So it's this really perverse incentive that they're trying to establish.
Yeah. And then to continue the kind of what I'll just say is legal, even though we're kind of outside of the courts now. So they tried to sue you and tried to, sounds like, sue some other organizations as well. You won in court. And now there's legislation working its way through, referred to as the ProCodes Act. And some of the language they use is bipartisan support for the ProCodes Act, which will help protect lives, power economic growth, and save taxpayer dollars. So if these groups get to copyright it, you're somehow going to be safer. It will save lives, power economic growth, and save taxpayer dollars. I think that's a stretch, but it's kind of like, okay, we weren't able to win in the courts. We're going to play politics. If I'm
right,
if I'm giving my opinion here, not being a neutral observer of this, I don't think.
So we're coming up to almost 25 years, so almost a quarter century of them attempting to win this in the courts and just losing across the board. So they've tried it for almost a quarter century, haven't gotten anywhere with it. Just continually reestablish the fact that when the codes are adopted, they enter the public domain. So the ProCodes Act is an attempt to do a runaround around the legal system. They tried there, they couldn't get anything done. In fact, they just established what they didn't want to, which is that codes are in the public domain. And now they're going to DC, to the policymakers. And the description you read is very representative of the approach. And it's basically, how can we obscure the bill and what the bill actually does, and kind of wash it in this idea that it promotes open access to the law, which it absolutely doesn't. And I can go into like interesting conversations we've had on the Hill.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
So it turns out this is the third Congress, and each session is 2 years long. This is the third Congress that they're attempting to introduce the bill. It failed in the first one, failed in the second one, and now they're trying for a third time. Now, in the first and second, there was traction. Like, they talked to some offices, and like, of course, like a lot of people said no, but like some people were interested in the bill. Now, when we entered the scene and all these other public interest groups to talk to these offices, we're like, why in the world did you agree, or did you even
support this?
About this bill? And they would mention a lot of these arguments the other side was making that were very, very flimsy, but without the data, they just didn't know. They're just like, oh, like, I thought building codes are good, and this seemed to help building codes, and so maybe we'll support it. And they need money. They say they'll go out of business if they don't get this bill, and we want to continue these organizations to keep producing the code. So we had these very interesting conversations where we're like, well, okay, let's bring the data to the table. Let's just look at the facts here. The biggest argument is they will go out of business if they can't put a copyright on these codes. But if you look over the course of time, and we take ICC as an example, 10 years ago, they're making $50 million a year in revenue. Today, they're making $100 million a year in revenue. So they have doubled that revenue. The CEO gets paid 10 times the national average of a nonprofit CEO. So despite losing in the courts repeatedly, and the codes being as adopted being available out there, their revenue grows year over year over year. And 80% of that is not selling the code. It comes from certification, training, and product evaluation. So the vast majority is all the surrounding pieces that come with publishing the code. And actually, I'll just mention a quote here. This comes from the first time ICC lost, which was, the 2002 case against Vec. And the judge said, "It is difficult to imagine an area of creative endeavor in which the copyright incentive is needed less." So these judges have studied their financials, because in lawsuits you do like a full X-ray through all their documents. They over and over they study the financials and they're like, this argument does not hold water. Like, you're making more money than you ever have. The incentives are there, and it's dismissed out of hand every single time by every single judge. Now, sorry, this is very long-winded, but basically, we just need to bring that same data to the policymakers in DC on the Hill. Like, look, here's all the judges have done a thorough analysis of their financials. Here's the revenue they're generating year over year, increasing. And just educate them, just giving them the facts.
Yeah. So I think it's reasonable to say that, okay, you're making 80% of your profits not on selling books, for lack of a better word. And, you're not going to go out of business here. I think the better argument is you shouldn't copyright the law. And full stop, whether you're making money or not.
Good point.
But if you do want to say, because one of the things that I often think about is before I want to say before I realized how much they were making on everything else. But even so, like, all right, they are extending an effort to produce this code that ends up being for the public good, we'll say. Shouldn't they be compensated for that? And now one could maybe argue they are compensated by selling certifications in education and the product evaluations and all that kind of stuff. But we want them to continue to do that. Should they be compensated in some way for producing that code? And how would you think that should look? Do you think they should be? And then if so, like, how do you think that would look?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that they're a nonprofit. So this is, in theory, not supposed to be like a profit maximizing endeavor. This is an organization that exists to keep people safe. And if they're making that much money from these adjacent services, that can easily support the code development process. So the lion's share comes from not selling the book, but from all these tangential services. And that, by and large, can fund the code development process. Now, do you need to, pay your CEO 10 times the national average of a nonprofit CEO? Probably not. Like, these are nonprofits. That is not the goal. The goal is not to make a cash generating machine that can really benefit the individuals. This is for the national good. And it's clear that these organizations can make a lot of money. Now, do they need to be as bloated as they are today? I probably not. Like, it could probably run more like call it a normal nonprofit, or even if they want to make double as much as a nonprofit, they have a lot of margins to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I have thought, if you want to be, and I was not thinking of it through the nonprofit lens, and that's a good point. But if you wanted to be hyper specific about, okay, that's a duty that the states would have to do on their own. And actually they used to do in some cases. Massachusetts had their own fire code up until 2015, 2018, something like that, before they adopted NFPA 1. So in my mind, my solution here, nobody's asking me, but I'll tell you, is I think if the state wants to adopt ICC codes or NFPA codes, they should pay the ICC or NFPA for the right to say we're going to purchase that and we're going to use this as law. And hey, how much is that worth? 2 million, 3 million, and purchase it. But because it's the law and you can't copyright it, but we still want you to do that work, we should pay you for it.
Right. And I
just one thought. I haven't gone completely through all the machinations of is that allowable or is that reasonable, but that's one thing I thought of.
And I think it's a great point. I think that could work. That could work well, as long as it's like a reasonable fee. I think the taxpayer, I don't think, is obligated to make sure their CEO makes 10 times the national average. So I think it needs to be like a reasonable fee. But so yeah, I think that could work very, very well. I will point out too, the code is written by volunteers. So industry professionals, government officials are coming together to actually do the heavy lifting of writing the codes. So these organizations are convening those committees, but that's one part of it. But what about these volunteers? The volunteers go, they write the codes, contribute their time, and then what do they get in return? Those same organizations charge them for the same books they help volunteer to write. So I think the solution could work well, because basically we'd all contribute time, we'd volunteer, and then the taxpayer pays for like the coordination of that volunteer time, and everyone gets free access. I think that could work quite well.
Yeah. And to take a peek behind the curtain, part of those volunteers are industry who are pushing to get code written to benefit themselves so they can sell products. So there's a whole nother level in the system that's a little broken as well. If everybody was completely altruistic and we're going to go there through life safety, but XYZ manufacturer, I'm guessing, isn't really there for public health and safety.
Yeah, and that's what I was alluding to at the top of
that. Might be a little
but,
cold, but yeah.
But I mean, but it does happen, unfortunately. And I think the New York Times reported on this, but there was a whistleblower in the energy codes and sustainability codes that goes pushing towards like green and renewable energies. And then I think it was oil interest or fossil fuel interest basically scuppered that deal. And they sent backroom, emails and backroom deals to scupper the codes being proposed, and they didn't get proposed. And there was a whistleblower. New York Times reported on it. The American Institute of Architects put out a statement condemning it. But like that happens, and that was fortunate in the case that there was a whistleblower that came to light. But how many deals are done in the back room that, like, us as a homeowner or a renter get, like, we're adversely impacted by it, and it might benefit an interest group because they made a deal
every day. And I think when I first started in this, there was much less of it, but I think it was kind of like, even on local level, it was kind of like, whoever the chief executive was, whether it was a mayor or a governor or whoever, oh yeah, there's that board, they make the building code, and nobody really, that's those people over there in the corner, they figure out how to make things safe. But over time, I've noticed more and more attention paid to, oh wait, let's appoint the people that will put the stuff in that we want. And it's become much more political and politicized rather than a life safety and public health code. It's become an avenue to get political, to gain political ground via the code, right?
I think if you have voting blocks in these code committees that are voting on the code, they vote in a block and they represent private interest groups, something's broken in that process. Like you're swinging votes, you're influencing what gets into the code for the sake of a private interest group. I think we're just losing touch of, like, what's the point of the code? The point of the code is to keep citizens and homeowners and renters and business owners just safe in their buildings. Like that is the be all end all. Like that should be like a laser focus. and nothing else should come in the way of that. No obstacles should come in. You shouldn't have a fossil fuel private interest group voting on energy codes. That does not keep in mind your homeowner.
Yeah, and on both sides, right? You shouldn't have the solar panel manufacturer deciding that every home should have solar, right? Like it's these like competing interests. And I only want to bring it up because I think people should realize it might not be what they think it is.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's why we really like the work of the National Association of Home Builders, or NAHB, because they do these kind of third-party studies. And at least from what we've seen, they're not scared to make a statement, and they'll analyze, okay, what's the impact on cost? And they'll push back on different pieces. And you're right, like maybe there's like an energy code, and like I know some pushback in California is like it does increase the cost of a home. Or if we're thinking about climate resiliency and the LA fires, it's like it's really difficult because we can make all homes much more resilient, but that also raises the prices. So what's the balance there? And I think the NAHB does a good job being that kind of neutral third party voice who is not selling like the fireproofing material. They're not selling like the solar panels. They're also not the fossil fuel company. It's just like they just want to build homes for
yes people. Yeah, and that's and that's where you want kind of the decisions to be, with building officials and engineers and folks like that are nobody is completely unbiased, but they don't have a direct financial stake in pushing one way or the other,
right?
As a fossil fuel company would, or a solar panel company would, or name the industry.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I guess no one's going to be completely independent, and maybe that's why you need more voices at the table. Just as many perspectives and opinions as you can, and just have that heard in the open.
Yeah. So that's the lay of the land right now. The ProCodes Act, it appears like it made its way through the House.
It failed,
or out of a committee.
Out of committee, failed in the House at the end of last Congress, and now it's being reintroduced and in the committee this year.
Okay. Yeah, and then it seemed like one case went to the Supreme Court, and it was in Georgia, and it had to do about annotations that were through STOs, the Standards Development Organizations, and they pretty much said that you can't. Same decision. Nope, you can't take that, and it does not put them out. You can't. It puts them outside of the reach of copyright protection, is what they said. Once you make it
right. And a direct quote by Ruth Bader Ginsburg is, "Beyond doubt, state laws are not copyrightable." And they said it in very, very clear terms in multiple. That's there's a million quotes from that, but that's our favorite because it's so concise. Clear. But it was very clear.
Yeah, and in the decision they had put in quotes. The document said, quote, "Official Code of Georgia annotated."
Right.
So it's pretty clear what we're dealing with.
Right. And that's just been consistent. And it's really nice. Like the more case law we build up, the more they reference each other. So you'll see like that case is quoted all the time. Other like ICC's first loss, their second loss, like all these cases are quoted kind of across the place in the different decisions.
And I do want to get into a little bit more on what's coming as far as functionality goes. But before I do, the other important piece, I think, for someone like myself, another interesting thing is I saw them mention that, or it was kind of alluded to the fact that there might be tax law that gets written by outside organizations as well. So this isn't confined to, it's just outside organizations that write building code and fire code. They're writing other laws that we have to do with, like when we need to pay our taxes.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why all these other groups have gotten involved in this and have been pushing back against the SDOs, is the slippery slope kind of argument. It's saying, okay, if we as a nation allow the building codes and the electrical codes to be copyrighted, what else can be copyrighted? Can the tax law be copyrighted? So when we go to file our taxes, we're actually, guess what? You're not allowed to see that. You don't, yeah, you don't know.
You got to
And
pay.
you got to pay. You don't know what money you owe. Yeah, you don't know what money you owe until you pay us more money to figure out how much money you're ultimately gonna have to pay us. And that's in like tax, but it can go over to like healthcare codes as well. I mean, of course, the construction of healthcare, but also like the operation of healthcare, and all these adjacent industries. That's why it's such a hot topic issue or hot button issue, is because it's so significant to so many pieces of how the country works.
Yeah, and one thing that stuck out to me personally, because I could see this happening, we do a lot of content. So if I want to write something, a blog post or whatever, to say, hey, here's how you need to comply with this new regulation. So if you want to make your building safe, you need to do X, Y, and Z. But I can't write what the law is that you need to comply with, because that's copyrighted. And that would be a copyright infringement for me to write what the law is in my blog post to tell you how to comply with the law.
Right. And yeah, and that's a blog post, but you also have universities and training centers. We've talked to professors and educators where they're like, hey, like we really want to like quote this section of the law to teach our students how to comply with the law. And we're like, yes, like that, like the course has said, that's fine. But it's just crazy to me that they're scared to do that in the first place. Like, in what world do we live where an educator teaching students is terrified to tell the kids what the law is, or adults do if they're in training centers, say what the law is and like how to actually make a compliant design or a compliant building in like a slideshow in a classroom setting. And that's happened dozens of times.
Yeah, it's absurd. Why can't I say what the code is?
Right.
But I mean, that's just absurd on its face value. Well, you can't write down what the code is because that code is copyrighted. You can look at it. It's accessible. You can look at it, but you can't talk about it, and you can't write it somewhere else.
Well, you can't copy paste. So those teachers would not be able to paste that into a slide or even quote it in that slide. So,
and they usually don't even give you the functionality.
Right.
Like you try to do it and it won't let you copy and paste it.
Right.
And actually, if you want to look at it, make sure you comply with our terms of service, and we won't have your email, and probably end up on some list.
Right. Yeah, and hopefully you're like able-bodied and have great eyesight. If not, well, good luck using an e-reader, or good luck accessing the text or using e-readers to get code, or have access to a computer and all these things. Like it's setting it up so you have to be in this perfect case scenario to actually get into these limited reading rooms, and then even when you get in there, you can't copy paste anyways or print.
Yeah, and I don't want people to feel like we're beating a dead horse, but we just want you to like understand like how absurd this is. Could you not know what the speed limit is? Right? Like, nope, you can't write down what the speed limit is. Like, where it's copyrighted. Like, what makes it's absurd is kind of what it is.
And the good news here is that over the last coming up to almost 25 years, like the course have always gone the same way. So I think we hope we're kind of getting to a little bit of an end of the era. Like there's only so many times you can make the same argument in the legal system. I will say the American legal system is a little bit lenient with that compared to other countries. So it's kind of bewildering. They can actually bring it 8 or 9 times, but we will get to the end of it. And I think it is I think that the lawmakers in DC are seeing the same thing that the legal system has, and I think eventually we'll get there. I think eventually there'll be a time where people aren't nervous to say what the requirements mandated by the government are.
Yes. Fingers crossed. Hopefully that day is soon. Functionality. And I kind of feel like if the code writing organizations, standard development organizations had done what Upcodes did, this would all be a moot point. Right? The reason you were successful is it was free, it was easily accessible, it was simple, it had a nice user interface. Like it was, oh, hey, this is easy, I can go there. And people would have happily probably even paid extra to ICC or NFPA or whatever code writing body it is to have that functionality. But I think they went with this gatekeeper model and made it really challenging. And then that opened to a space to say, no, you know what? We're going to make it free, easy, accessible, and make you better when you come to our website. Not to me, this isn't a sales pitch. I've taken no money from Upcodes. This is just me as a user. So you guys did that, but what's kind of next? You talked about AI integration, and that's already in there. I've used that. That's helpful. Where are you hoping to go from here?
And I'll just say I fully agree. Like if there was no friction or pain point introduced, there would just be no opportunity to or chance to like make a product that solved a pain point. So and a lot of people have brought that up. So you're not actually not the first one.
Yeah.
And I agree. But to your second point, yeah, what does the future look like? Yeah, you mentioned it, but we have integrated AI and we'll continue doing that. I think the big focus for us is shifting away from proactive research to reactive research to proactive research. So basically, instead of like last minute, you have to look up a code requirement, you have to know what you need, and then you proactively go out there and you get that information, and you know what you have to search and whether it's an AI or traditional search, and go get that information. We want to start pushing that information to people. So being a little bit more advanced in terms of maybe taking like a project brief or a drawing set, or maybe you describe your building and then saying like, here's the requirements you need. And maybe there's things you didn't know you needed. So it's hard when you don't know what you don't know, but really trying to be a little bit more advanced with I don't know, just removing some of that work done by the end user and kind of pushing those requirements to them.
So would you say more of analysis
Exactly.
versus being a search function?
Right, exactly. Then I'll give a specific example to make that less abstract. So basically, if you're an architect early on in a project phase, you can upload a project brief. It would read the project brief and then automatically generate a checklist, and back and forth with the designer, but generate a checklist that you can start to systematically go through. It's like, okay, now we're designing the hallways, now we're designing the rooms, the bathrooms, the stairs, and what are the codes we need to follow, and routing people out. And then they can start to cross those items off, and then generate a code report. So it's a lot more, I would say, like automated in a sense, but really just like guardrails. Basically, just trying to do a lot of that research for them and being kind of like a partner sitting next to them, letting them know things they might be forgetting and try to make that a bit easier.
Yeah, almost like a first pass code review.
Right, exactly. And do the first pass code review and then save that into a project, and then the designer would get in and clean it up and tweak it for their project. Because I don't think it's never going to be a replacement for somebody. So it's not, the ambition is not to say, okay, end to end, it's going to be 100% perfect. It's to be that first pass, be that assistant that works with you and is trying to alleviate as much as possible, and ideally prevent any potential mistakes that can be, created upstream and cause problems downstream. Yeah,
I think it maybe Scott and I were talking earlier that he likes to bike and sometimes goes on long rides. I just had a gentleman on Armor from Windover, and we chatted, I think, on a call a while back. He has a software that part of the system is it will do a code check of the drawings for anything spatial, geometrical. And he says the same thing, right? Which is, hey, this is going to get you 80%, 90%, whatever it is. And then the code official is still going to have to look at it. But we're still moving the ball down the field a huge way, right? Making things a lot easier, getting us a lot closer to where we want to be. And some of like the dirty, tedious stuff gets picked up through a software, through AI, and gets us a lot closer to where we're going, and gets us there a lot faster too.
Right. Yeah. And if we think about the ideal end state and work backwards, the ideal end state is you have your certificate of occupancy, you have your inspector on site, and they're not catching code violations. That would be the best case scenario. they're going, they need a second set of eyes and they're on site and they're looking.
Mhm.
But to use that example we mentioned before, the toilet distance off the wall in an accessible bathroom, and when you have the grouting and the tiles, that should never happen. That you can catch that upstream, and that's the kind of thing that ideally never happens. And construction will be more efficient. It'll be more affordable if we can catch these things upstream. So working backwards, how do we catch those things? And it's exactly tools like that. It's tools that can work alongside you. And as you're designing, just giving you a heads up. It's like, hey, basically, yeah, it's basically like Microsoft Clippy, someone like on the side that's like, hey, heads up, like, that toilet distance, while sure it looks great in Revit, it does not take into account the assembly. It does not take into account like the wall composition and the reality of on-site construction. Like you should probably leave a quarter inch, a half inch of margin on that. And I know that's a very specific example, but when you multiply that across thousands of different areas, and as you work, you have someone basically doing a little red underline squiggly that says like, this is like a spell check, being like, hey, attention here. You can ignore it if you want to, but pay attention.
Yeah, and it's almost like a modern day lessons learned.
Right.
What were the pain points? Because you talk about the tile on the wall for the toilet, but the same thing applies to usually the first step in a set of stairs, where you walk out and you're like, this step is 3 inches tall. What happened? They're like, oh, well, we didn't realize it was mud set in, quarry stone that's an inch thick. And we now have a bust and the stairs got to come out. Like, and that sounds like something extreme, but I've been on a job where that has happened. Right. So yeah, I was wondering, how do you do that? How do you factor in? I think that's the right thing, which is, make sure you check wall coverings on this. Make sure you confirm floor thicknesses. Make sure you can, if it's for insulation and you need continuous insulation on the outside and or whatever, it might say like, in its existing building, they may say, make sure you confirm the wall thickness, right? Something like that.
Right.
That would be a good way to do it. And I think, like I brought it up because I think it would be for someone like you to listen to the Armor episode, because they're coming at it from a different angle, but the end result is kind of the same. So it might benefit you might enjoy listening to be like, oh, I hadn't thought about thinking about it that way. So yeah, I think you might enjoy listening to that one. You guys are both kind of from different angles, but go in the same direction.
Yeah, and I would argue the problem space is so enormous. It's going to need multiple solutions and people thinking about it from different ways. And yeah, the software, because obviously that's what we think about, but it's the architects, the engineers, the GC, the trades. It's everybody tackling it from their own perspective. And I think, yeah, I don't think there's one magic bullet to it. I think it's got to be a combination of everyone's everyone's effort. And yeah, not just one software solution, but multiple, tackling it from different angles. And sorry to bring this back to the copyright issue, but a big thing that we believe in is that open access to the law as we open this up will be fruitful, and there will be multiple companies tackling things from different issues. Like we take one approach, but it's one of probably like 30 approaches that need to be assessed, like from like plan review to permitting to maybe like a spell check in your Revit model, like you're mentioning, or as builds or the submittals. Like there's so many pieces of that puzzle that codes would impact, and that should really make their way into those tools.
Yeah, because the spatial drawing code review is going to be dependent on making sure you have the right code that you're referencing, right? And that's where someone like Upcodes, who's trying to, what's the right word for them? I want to say house in all the right places. There's a better word for it, but like blend all those together into one place. Like you need that to do the drawing spatial piece, right? Because otherwise you're checking that dimension, but you're not checking the right piece of code.
Right. Yeah, and I think this gets into a whole other topic, but basically the interoperability of these different solutions, they should talk to each other. So if maybe you're using Procore or maybe you're using Autodesk Construction Cloud, and you have a lot of project information there, that should probably talk to us at Upcodes, and we should pass back code information, or it should talk to well, I guess they do submittals, but it should talk to your plan review and your inspection software, or like they should
Mm.
all kind of talk to each other and share data. So we're constantly checking our designs in multiple different ways all the way through the process.
Mm. I like that. All right, the last question that I always ask everybody, and you can completely leave the building and fire code world if you want, or software world if you want, but um, what do you think we'll see more of, and what do you think we'll see less of over the next, you pick 2, 5, 10 years, and you could pick more or less or both, but from where you sit, where do you see us changing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I would choose 10 years, and not to be like pessimistic,
Yeah.
but just seeing how slow some of these things move in terms of like
Yeah.
legislation and law, and like the court cases just take years. So like maybe I'll zoom to like 10 years to the big picture. I think what we'll see more of is more resilient housing and building. So if we look at oh, sorry, let me take a step back. I think a common theme is we always try to identify the ideal end state and then work backwards, like I was mentioning before. So like, what is that ideal end state in 10 years? And I think it is more resilient housing. So things like the fires in LA recently, but you know, there's just across the board. I forget the amount of damage done in aggregate last year. Oh, it was $182 billion in disaster losses from 27 events last year. Just a staggering number. So how do we make more resilient communities? And I think we're going to have more of that in the future. And then what less of? I think less cost to deliver that same safety. So we want both. We want more affordable housing that's more resilient. And I think the way to do that is themes we've talked about today. It's making sure the legislature, the kind of the underlying foundation is free and accessible, so we can have tools built on top of that, and those tools will help us make the building safer and then make them more affordable by avoiding all these unnecessary mistakes.
And by resilient, you're just meaning essentially resistant and safer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a staggering photo from the LA fires where you saw an entire neighborhood that was burned, and then one house was standing alone. And why? Right. It was more resilient. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny, there's a because some people look at it also from the waste reduction, right? Which is you're building a building to 30 years later tear the thing down and build something bigger or whatever. Like, you know, what keeps us from doing that? And there's an interesting thought, and I feel like it's accurate. They talk about making an aesthetically pleasing building makes the building more resilient in the fact of you won't tear down a beautiful building. It's worth it to spend the money to renovate that because you can't replicate that. You know, it can't be done anymore. And there's more of a value to a beautiful building, and will help you it'll make you want to hang on to that and not tear it down. Yeah. I always found that fascinating. I found it to be true.
I mean, yeah, you look at the different housing stock across the country, and the house we're in, I forgot what year it was built, but it's old. It's like a couple decades old. And they probably overbuilt. They probably used too much materials. But on the other hand, it's holding up pretty well. And the sound insulation is pretty good. And the insulation to like the art, I don't even know if they know what the R value is, but like the insulation to the outside is also pretty good. And they probably overbuilt it a bit, but now it's kind of holding up, and I don't see it need to be knocked down, a new house built. But in our neighborhood, there are some new construction, and it's a lot of water damage from pushing the edge a little bit, maybe with their insulation, and a lot of work's happening there. So it is kind of an interesting trade-off to that point.
Yeah, I found it very interesting. I mean, because no one's going to pause that building built in the 70s that's has cheap joists that collapse in a fire and doesn't really look that great, and
Mhm.
you're gonna say, let's just tear that thing down. But if you have beautiful building with great detail and
Yeah.
is enjoyable to look at and something you want to live in, like you'll spend that time to kind of keep that thing alive. And that's resiliency from a different way, not from a life safety way, but just, you're that building's going to last forever because people will value it just from an
Right.
aesthetic standpoint. But sorry to go off on subject. When you were talking about that, that came to my mind. But
Well, I guess there's the whole local ordinance, and having to build to like a certain aesthetic quality, and getting the planning approval, and so I guess there is that whole component too, that maybe there is a certain standard there, and you're kind of setting up for success in the future to make sure things aren't built up and then torn down pretty quickly.
awesome. So I'm excited. You can tell, obviously, I'm a fan of what you're doing on both levels because I have a little bit of a libertarian streak in me, so I don't like copywriting the law if you haven't gotten that after this long conversation. And I enjoy the usability on top of it. So, please keep it up. And if people can access Upcodes, just go to upcodes.com.
Yep.
And it's free,
Yep,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
It's free. You can use it. You can look things up. I have the paid version just because I want more functionality and I want to do other things, and I do it for a living. But if you're a super or a project manager and you just need to look things up, it's a great, pretty easy way to find what you need. So I would recommend people check out Upcodes. And anything else, Scott, before we wrap it?
I think that's it from my end. This is a fantastic conversation and glad to connect. The world is pretty small, between people who are passionate about all of these different topics and how they intersect. So really enjoyed it and love to connect.
Yeah, as well. And I'm not just saying this, but I would have this phone call with you and talk this long with you, even if we weren't recording it. Right. Like this is just fascinating stuff and stuff that I'm pretty passionate about. So this is great. I'm glad you took the time.
And hopefully some listeners are passionate too. And I think it's everyone's contribution into this that will get us to that end state, that 10-year goal. How do we deliver these safer and more affordable houses?
I love it. And keep up the educational component to that. Like the diagrams are fantastic. I told you the last time we spoke, use them in a lot of my presentations.
Oh, great.
They're just so great to try. And when you're trying to teach people, just to visually show them something, it goes a long way. So
we're all visual people. So I'm glad it's helpful.
Awesome.